Alright, so I'm Xena, Stitchomancy, if you know me from other social media sites, and this is My Comic Book Girlfriend Has to Be a Redhead, Misogynistic Reactions to Race-Bending Iris West and Mary Jane Watson. This is a slightly edited version of the presentation that I did last Saturday for the Pop Culture Association National Conference on a panel that I was on with Rukmini Pandey, which was awesome. All right, let's get started. Within days of the CW announcing that Candice Patton would be playing a race-bent version of Iris West, something that was frankly racist occurred. Fans of Barry Allen did three things in rapid succession. First, they said that Iris West had to be a redhead, and that not casting a redhead, and especially by casting a black woman in the role, was doing Iris and Barry a disservice. They also claimed that this signified redheads being oppressed in some significant way. Then, despite the fact that Barry and Iris are the ancestors of most of the DCU's speedsters, these fans decided that Iris had to be single because she's a strong black woman. And lastly, we saw the rise of Snowberry, a non-canon male-female ship between Barry Allen and secondary character Caitlin Snow that was sparked after the first trailer where Daniel Panabaker's character was shown telling Barry that she needed him to urinate in a flask. I'm a huge fan of shipping non-canon ships. However, part of what inspired my ire for this ship, as well as this presentation itself, is the fact that fans aren't content to just ship their ship. They have repeatedly removed Iris West from the focus, diminished or represented her role in Barry's life, and on some extreme situations that are really rather plentiful, they send the actress that plays her incredibly racist comments. So the goal of this presentation is to look briefly but closely at the way that members of these transformative fandom spaces react to race-bent comic book girlfriends like Iris West in two incarnations, and to the rumors of said race-bending. We're told often that fandom is supposed to be a safe space where squeeze can't be harshed. But what's so squee-worthy about fandom spaces like this, where non-black members of fandom go above and beyond to tear down black characters and the actresses in these race-bending roles? Now, to sort of set the stage, I want to just provide some terminology used in fan spaces that will be referenced in this presentation. So I'd just like to talk about the terminology a bit, as I said before. So first, let's start with West Allen. That's the name smush for the Barry Allen Iris West ship. Snowberry is the name smush for Barry Allen and Caitlin Snow. Squee is basically a word that kind of encompasses a lot, but it really refers to like the pleasure, the experience of pleasure that fans can gain and experience in space. I also think of it in terms of a noise. Like I hear squee and I picture somebody squealing at the top of, their squealing organs, whatever. Race bending is where a quote unquote historically white character is either reimagined or recast as a character of color. This was coined back when the Avatar: The Last Airbender film happened, which did the opposite. It whitewashed the canonically Asian characters. This is something that causes a lot of issue because a lot of people hate race bending because they're terrible. Next, let's look at the anti-fan, which is kind of super important to me as a member of fandom and as an academic looking at fandom. So if a fan is someone that loves something, the anti-fan is a hater. That's how they're positioned, opposite one another, where the anti is either somebody who hates or sees themselves as against something to this huge degree. They can be anti-ship, anti-character, anti-fandom, anti-kink, anti-anything. But an important thing to note is that fans of color and other critical fans of popular ships or fandom dynamics are often called anti-fans or antis as a way of dehumanizing them. It's a dehumanizing tactic. An example is the way that Black fans and Jewish fans and feminist fans of Star Wars have been called antis, specifically for calling out the fandom's hyper-focus on ships like Reylo, which is Kylo Ren and Rey, and Kylux, which is Kylo Ren and the ginger space fascist with less than 4 minutes of screen time. In the context of this presentation, how this matters is that I'm going to talk about how people making valid criticism of racist erasure in fandom as a whole are often dismissed as haters just out to ruin everyone's fun. This ties back into the last term on this post, on this panel, the social justice warrior, because that's also used to dehumanize people who have valid reasons for the criticism they make in and about fandom. And then the last post in terms of terminology in the core of this presentation is misogynoir. All right. In a nutshell, misogynoir is a concept coined in 2010 by queer black feminist Moya Bailey. It refers to the specific ways that misogyny and anti-black racism combine in order to hurt black women. And you can read this definition from the creator of Gradient Layer, who made it nice and pretty for us and easy to, I guess, ping in your head. Misogynoir exists alongside a binary where white women, and honestly everyone else, are automatically elevated above black women. Misogynoir uses micro and macroaggressions in order to reinforce a point of view that keeps black women at the bottom. Essentially, it's the ultimate 1-2 punch when it comes to oppressive structures. Another important thing to note that Trudy and Moya point out in their work is that anyone can promote or perform misogynoir regardless of their race, their gender, and their sexual identity. You can be guilty of hurting someone, of hurting a black woman via misogynoir due to the way that you just don't think of them as people. It's ignoring their contributions. It's black men talking about Serena and Venus Williams with, frankly, ugly language, and then being surprised when they're not dating black men. It's it crosses borders, and that's so upsetting because, you know, the one thing you'd want to cross borders isn't hatred, but here we are. All right, so next we're going to talk about misogynoir in fandom spaces. So let's talk about the two fronts of misogynoir in fandom. First, we're going to talk about how misogynoir is weaponized against black female fans. First, we are always positioned or portrayed as angry for no reason. Everyone else has a valid reason to be angry, not us. And then because we are a quote-unquote minority in fandom spaces, our contributions and discussions in fandom are either erased or misattributed to white fans. See the meta, Your Vagina is a Bigot, My Vagina is a Saint by Francesca, which ignores the fact that black women have been talking about fandom and racism in fandom for decades. That 16,000 word piece of meta fandom essentially serves as revisionist history that erases women of color from fanish history while attributing the conversations we start and have to white fans that only want to get quote-unquote ally points. Next, gaslighting, anonymous harassment, and racial slurs happen really often in the inboxes and mentions of black women that speak up about the way we and characters that look like us are treated. I also want to pause here to quote Dominique Deidre Johnson's Misogynoir and Anti-Black Racism, What the Walking Dead Teaches Us About the Limits of Speculative Fiction Fandom, because the relationship she I guess, charts out between misogynoir and speculative fiction fandom spaces really matches what I'm doing. Instead of imagining worlds that are perhaps more inclusive of non-white subjects, we are expected to desire, participate in the creation, and sustain the fantasy of white heterosexual normativity and cisgender male dominance as the optimal formation of humanity worth saving. This uncritical historicity of many dystopian fantasies encourages its creators and consumers to reassert hegemonic divisions when convenient, and thus reproduce racial subordination while encouraging hostilities under the guise of harmless artistic interpretation. So we're always angry. We have no reason to be angry, and we're just interfering in these creators' rightful desire to portray this nerdy world, this superhero-filled futuristic world without any characters that look like us. So at PCA, the day before, we had a panel, a roundtable discussion about decolonizing fan studies. And one of the things that we talked about was the way that pleasure is often used as a way to excuse the behaviors that non-Black and largely white fans have towards characters and fans of color in fan spaces. We're told, particularly with regard to straight cis white women, that their desire and their pleasure in fan spaces trumps those of everyone that might be critical of their stance. This is a huge problem because we don't get to talk about our pleasure. So next we move on to how Black female fans are deemed anti-fans. I touched upon that a little bit in the previous slide, previous-ish slides, but Black female fans, especially in the Star Wars fandom, the Flash fandom, in the Walking Dead fandom, are treated as villains for speaking out about the treatment of Black characters. And then there's always this repeated insinuation, you're just harshing our squee. Why can't fandom be fun like it used to be? And this is directed very often at Black female fans because, it's our fault that fandom isn't awesome. We're ruining everybody's experiences, and we'll touch on that at the end of this presentation because there's something that you guys need to see because it's bad. Next, let's talk quickly about the misogyn war that fandom uses against Black female characters. There's the reliance on X is a strong Black woman that don't need no man. It's this ridiculously racist meme that a lot of Black women have written and spoken about wanting to see banished from the internet. It basically says that Black women are so strong, so powerful, so tough that they don't need to be loved. So I've seen this with basically every single Black character out there. Most recently, when Lupita Nyong'o was cast in Black Panther, I saw largely white men and women going, well, I hope she's not a love interest. She deserves better than that. She shouldn't be reduced to a love interest. And then after Star Trek Beyond, Uhura, in fact, a popular female writer whose name I can't remember, but I wrote about her, so I'll link to the post at the end of this, was like, I wish she could be like the Uhura in the show who didn't need romance, or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. But Uhura was single in that show in the 1960s because it was the 1960s. Racism, racism. Then we have Black female characters as desexualized bros to their actual or potential love interests. See Abby Mills and Sleepy Hollow, who immediately after the show started, fandom was like, wow, I feel like Abby and Ichabod are bros. No, they fucking weren't. And I know this isn't academic, to curse, but they really weren't bros. Additionally, Black female characters are often rewritten as villains by fans in the same way that Black female fans are rewritten to be villains in, fan spaces like Brayden and Teen Wolf, or, honestly, every Black woman, honestly. And then they're also killed off in fan works, often. And then the last thing, this is an argument that I see, this is not specific to Black female characters, but there's the idea of, I don't hate them because they're Black now. I hate them because they're useless. The real character would have been better, where the real character is the white one. Except, that brings us to this. Authenticity doesn't actually matter. I've written about this before, and I'll link to the 2 posts that I've made a year apart about racism in fandom and how the comic book fandom hating race bending is ridiculous. But I'm going to read a quote from one of them. I think this is the second one, which is, Dear comic fans, it's been a year since my first post, and y'all are still racist as heck when it comes to race bending. In that post, I wrote that if the only thing you care about when it comes to casting is an authentic hair color, Then I have to introduce you to the wonders of hair dye and wigs. And then I get to beat you with a bag full of them for complaining when these usually female characters are race bent, since you stay silent when a white male character isn't done to style. Neither of the two characters playing Barry Allen look like him. Neither of them have his canon personality. But where's the press reporting about how terrible both of them are for the job because they don't have blonde hair and because it's so strange to imagine this iconic blonde character being played by men who have dark hair? Suddenly, authentic appearances don't matter and there's no fuss about iconic anything. Just like it didn't matter when Tilda Swinton was cast as the Tibetan Ancient One. And yes, you can wail about how she's Celtic now, but my eyes aren't that bad. Everything about the character, right down to the look of her mystical pocket dimension, was taken from Tibetan culture. In a nutshell, this cry for authentic portrayals of characters only exists when race bending is brought into play. Ezra Miller and Grant Gustin don't have to defend their appearances or their characterization to the superhero fandom in regular interviews or social media because they're brunettes. Meanwhile, black actors and actresses like Candice Patton, Kiersey Clemons, Mehcad Brooks, and Michael B. Jordan have all had to defend themselves from racist fandom, and this is in interviews. We have interviews. Michael B. Jordan wrote a letter in the wake of his Fantastic Four casting because of how much racism he was being hit with. And Candice Patton has spoken repeatedly about the way that fandom reacts to her and the racism she gets sent, but nothing goes to Tilda Swinton. Nothing goes to Grant Gustin. Like, really? Next, let's get reactive. Seriously, I'm going to talk about some of the reactions that fandom has had to these race-bent characters. I'm primarily focusing on Iris West, as her character and actress have received a majority of incredibly racist comments. But I'm also going to touch briefly on the racist reactions that the rumors of Zendaya being cast as Mary Jane Watson have inspired. Alright, so Iris West is basically bae and life goals. I want to be her, but I also want to date her. And I mean, everyone with common sense feels the same way. Played by Candice Patton, Iris is a journalist, a student, and an investigator in her own right. She doesn't rely on Barry to have a life. Alright? He's a part of her life, but he's not the only person that matters, and he's not the only relationship that she has. The series doesn't go, oh no, Iris, you only exist because of Barry. If anything, Barry only exists because of Iris. At the bottom of this slide, I included a series of dialogue from the series where you have, at the end, Barry going, so he goes, in a conversation with Barry, Iris goes, Barry, come on, my contributions here are limited. I don't know science, I don't have powers, I don't know how to help you. And he goes, I couldn't do this without you. Her response, it's not true, is met with him saying, that is true. Whether you realize it or not, there is no Flash without Iris West. The show gets it, but unfortunately, fandom doesn't see things the same way. And Iris is treated more like a villain that really has no business interacting with these characters. So first, let's look at the differences in the way these two ships are represented on FanLore, which is a fandom wiki. On the top left, you can see the Barry Allen Caitlin Snow has it's full. It has a ton of stuff. I've scrolled through it. It's very active. People are updating it. And these aren't people who are exclusively fans of the ship. These are other people who are just like, yeah, I watched The Flash, I'll update it. Or I'm on fanfiction.net, I'll update it. Barry Allen and Iris West doesn't really have information if you look down at the bottom left. And then I also want to talk about the top right. So on the top right, this is a GIF from that's the scene that launched a ship. And underneath that is the person who actually saved this from, where they say, saw the Flash trailer recently, and I can't help but ship Barry and Caitlin already. How can you not ship them after she asked him to pee in a cup? Just look at them. I can already see her going to be all touchy with him. They are going to be amazing. October come already. This is the first trailer. This was the day it was released, and I'm going to point out that if you haven't watched the show, Caitlin West is cold. Part of that, Caitlin Snow. I know what I just did. Caitlin Snow is a cold character. It's not just because, they're trying to make her live up to her last name, but because that's just who she is, and it's fine. She has relationships, romantic relationships, with many people who aren't Barry, and that's fine. I just think it's really interesting that this is what goes through these fans' heads, you know? And like, a lot of this has to do with keeping black characters away from white ones. If you're in the Star Wars fandom, you will have noticed maybe that the reactions that people have to Finn interacting with Rey are kind of racist. Like, I've seen he sexually harassed her by holding her hand. I've seen he's not worthy to be in her presence because he's just a garbage man. Um, and it just goes on and on. And it's just, you guys are reinforcing these power structures that, have been dominant for decades. And you think that because you go, oh my God, it's just my preference, that's fine. But it's not. This is racism. The fandom spaces that allow for Barry Allen and Caitlin Snow, a non-canon slash ship with literally no hope of happening, to overtake vastly Barry Allen and Iris West in these conversations when people talk about the show and they're like, oh my God, Snowberry. That's not right. That's definitely not right. So let's look at some of the comments. All right, so these are gathered from Twitter. Yes, these are all Twitter. So these are just a few examples of how fans of the Flash show talk about Iris West and Candice Patton. Now, for everyone else, I blocked out their names, but I left Snowberry Talk in because of what they're saying, such as in the top right, her job is to show us what a labia looks like through clothes and breathing. This is about Iris. Um, Iris deserves to be written off. There's only so much constipated, dramatic, bad acting I can take. It's been 3 years, no more. This is actual hatred. Then the person in the middle with the Caitlin Snow icon, and a lot of these people have this, is saying, just like Iris West, the Flash, she's supposed to be white. But if you complain that they chose a black woman, they'll call you racist. But I want to feel represented. I can't ship West Allen when Iris doesn't look like me. As a black fan in fandom, and as a queer black fan in fandom, can I call bullshit? Because I'm going to. Because I've been alive for 26 years. I've had almost unlimited internet access for 18 years. I have shipped so many things. Like, despite my age, I am a fandom old. Fight me. And how I can count on like two hands the amount of ships I've shipped where one or both characters looked like me. And one out of like 11 billion superhero girlfriends doesn't look like this person and they're about to lose their minds. Then I think the most egregious example, it was so bad that I actually couldn't use the image from the Flash that this person used because it was racist. It was super racist. So this comment on the bottom right is by an actual white supremacist fan of the show. I couldn't use the example they used for Barry and Iris because they made a comment about gonorrhea, I think, where like black people are more likely to have it, and the Jewish head of the show wants white people to get gonorrhea. It used anti-Semitic imagery, and it tagged everyone in the cast, the showrunners and the actors. This image, which says, if you are white and your partner is black, you multiply your chances of being killed by 12.4, an 1140% increase. And they quote Department of Justice stats, but I'm assuming they're getting their alternate facts from the same place our current, regime does. But these are in fandom. People favorited this. People shared this. This was like in Snowberry circles a meme. And we're supposed to think that fandom is a safe space, but this is a white supremacist. I cannot make that any clearer. That's a white supremacist. and they're in your fandom. They're in a lot of your fandoms. So here I just want to look briefly at what's literally uh, fans erasing Iris and replacing her with Caitlyn. These two photo sets, hosted on Instagram and Tumblr, place Caitlyn into what is essentially Iris's place in Barry's life, while also stealing significant moments in their relationship. The photo set on the right literally cuts Iris out of her own engagement in order to replace her with Caitlyn. Other photos from this user and other Photoshop experts erase the significance of Iris as Barry's anchor or lightning rod, and even gives Caitlyn the tropes and characterization they claim to hate when Iris supposedly displays them. This includes making her life all about Barry and reducing her to a relationship, but it's okay when it's Caitlyn. Now let's talk about those Zendaya as Mary Jane rumors. Back in August of last year, The Wrap broke the news that singer, actress, model, and dancer Zendaya would be Mary Jane Watson in Spider-Man Homecoming. This was reported by Humberto Gonzalez, and so far everybody has denied it. I mean, I think Tom Holland may have slipped up and fessed up to the thing, but we don't know yet. The movie comes out in a couple of months, and then we'll find out. But here's the thing. If Zendaya were to play MJ, she'd be the third actress in the role since they started making these movies back in 2002. She'd also be the third actress who wasn't a natural redhead to play the role. But, as we saw with the various Barry Allens, actresses like Kirsten Dunst and Shailene Woodley don't get shit for their less than accurate hair color. But Zendaya was. Immediately, the responses she got were less than acceptable. She got racist tweets sent to her, made about her, but also the men behind the project, from her co-star Tom Holland to Stanley himself, received tons of tweets and inquiries insulting everything about her. Even Dan Slott, who isn't the nicest person out there, had to wade in to defend her. And I guarantee you that if Jack Kirby were alive today, he would have gotten his fair share of tweets accusing him of quote-unquote pandering to social justice warriors. And again, she's not confirmed to have this role. So we're going to look really quickly at some comments that were made about her casting. This is going to be on Twitter and Tumblr. So first, we have this person that says, nope, still looks fuck all like MJ. Sorry, but MJ is a white redhead. Why can't we just keep characters the same? She was only cast because she's a minority. She has no acting skills. This is despite her being cast in Spider-Man and her being on 2 really successful Disney shows, and I don't know, the fact that she is one of like a billion minorities in quotes, that were cast in the film. They didn't need to cast for diversity points. I love diversity and all, but Hollywood is looking ridiculous right now. A black Mary Jane? Really? And remember what I said about misogynoir coming from anyone? That's a black man. That is a black man. These two, if Zendaya doesn't have red hair when she plays Mary Jane Watson, I'll be pretty mad. Zendaya as Mary Jane? No other actresses are available to shoot? Okay, this is actually supposed to be a nice comment. This person is asking, why is it such a big deal that she was cast as Mary Jane? I don't understand why everyone has to make everything about race. And they basically try to pull the Hollywood is a capitalist machine and there are real problems in the world and we're never going to get to a post-racial society. This is a nice comment and it's still terrible. And here's this one, this next and final comment. It's actually an image of Zendaya's Shake It Up co-star, Bella Thorne, and this person goes, Bella Thorne would have been my choice for MJ. Like the character jumped right off the page. No, they are wrong, and that is a bad opinion. And also, this is what I mean. Erasing black characters and replacing them with white ones is really not acceptable. So, you might be asking yourself, why does this all matter? Why did I sit here and watch this video, this PowerPoint presentation, for over half an hour? So I'm going to share two things with you. So first, this is a message that I actually received on Tumblr a few years ago from an anonymous person after I was talking about race and fandom and shipping. They're not just fictional characters. Actually, yes, they are. That is all they are. Nobody is obliged to ship the way you want them to, and no matter how many bullshit disclaimers you throw into your writing, that is precisely what you are demanding. Take your incredibly lazy and head in navel concept of activism and shove it. This was something someone sat down and sent to another human being. This is honestly the milder end of the scale because I've actually received threats. I've had people just being really just dicks on anonymous memes about me. I've had really horrible things tweeted at me, like really racist things, like racial slurs. And not all of this is in the context of shipping in fandom, but it has always been about fandom. I think I've only once gotten negative responses because I'm like super liberal, and I think that's only happened once. Um, so let's talk about the fact that this is something someone sent me. Let's talk about the fact that the response to a post, and now I remember what the post is. It's the post about slash shipping and how the idea that fandom pushes this idea that the only way you can be queer in fandom and the only queerness that matters in fandom is between two white guys. And that's the response to me going, as a queer black woman, I'm really uncomfortable with the erasure I have seen for years. That's rude. And then the second one, this comes courtesy of the Star Wars fandom. This was not sent to me, but as I, being a black woman critical of fandom, would be deemed an anti, even though I think that label is ridiculous and you should not. There's a whole lot wrong with that. I'm going to tackle it like it was sent to me and was made specifically for me because of who I am and the position that I'm in fandom as a queer black person who is not taking the nonsense that fandom puts out. So here's the message, and this is to the marginalized people in the Star Wars fandom who have been criticizing the focus on Kylo Ren and Hux. I have a message for you, antis. Antis. You, the ones that demand content for their ship, all while harassing other shippers. You don't belong here, in this fandom, in this family. You, the ones insulting and using words without knowing the meanings. You don't belong here, in this fandom, in this family. You, the ones who think to do the right thing and wake people when you attack them over a ship. You don't belong here, in this fandom, in this family. You, all the ones that are ruining the experience in fandom for most of us. You don't belong here, in this fandom, in this family. There's no twinkle in your eyes. There's no force inside you. Like, do you remember what I said about how black and Jewish and feminist fans make up the majority of the quote-unquote antis in the Star Wars fandom, specifically because of how they hate the way that Finn has been mistreated and cast aside, as people claim a preference for ships centering white villains? Yeah. This is directed at these people. At people like me. We live in a world where brown and black bodies and minds are deemed less valuable than those belonging to white people. This translates to fandom spaces and to the way that characters of color are treated by these narratives and fandoms. We live in a world where I get messages like that first one, and would get more if I didn't block basically everyone that looked at me funny, or had an icon that I didn't like, or sneezed weirdly like 8 years ago in a bar in Texas. And we're members of the Star Wars fandom, which is a fandom that notably had people sharing and celebrating a video that linked the black and Jewish fans of the franchise who shipped Finn and Rey and who were dissatisfied with the focus on white villains. The video compared these people to Hitler. Let's just let that sink in. They compared marginalized people to one of the most monstrous humans in the world. And then they blame us, these same fans, for how terrible the fandom is and say that we don't belong in this fandom, in this family. And I mean, I'm willing to bet that they don't see themselves as racist. I don't know who the first person was. That's the point of being anonymous. And I don't know who the second person was because if I find them, we're going to have words. But I'm pretty sure people like this don't see themselves as harassing. They don't see themselves as bullying. They don't see themselves as bad guys. To them, discussions of misogyny, anti-black racism, kink, ship, fandom critical posts, even the really valid ones, as opposed to those weird ones about how the Steven Universe art is crap, which, yeah, duh, are just a way for social justice warriors to control fandom. That's the point of view that they're taking. So they're defending their safe space against people who are invading it. Except we've been here from the beginning. We have always been here. That was one of the major problems. I mean, but there were so many in Francesca's meta, was that she erased the presence of these unbelievably brilliant, diverse fans of color who have always been in fandom spaces, not just, including things like race fail, which was terrible, and you should Google that. So much horrible racism happened with race fail. Not just with that though, but like there have always been moments where white fans do something racist because we live in a world, and that world happens to be a racist one. So what I hope to achieve in these conversations about the racism I've witnessed and experienced in fan spaces is that I want to get you guys thinking about what you see and what you don't see in these spaces. I'm not saying you have to adore every single black and brown character that appears in your fandom, but you need to start asking yourselves why it's so easy to dismiss characters of color and why the experiences of fans of color aren't on your radar on a regular basis. A lot of people, when I make posts on Tumblr, are like, oh, I never knew this. Oh, I never saw Finn get mistreated. Well, who are you following? Who are you following that you can have a completely curated fandom experience where either you don't see the character of color at all, or when you see him, it's only positive, it's only people celebrating him in super performative ways? Because that's a lot of what that is, by the way. Why aren't you regularly seeing black fans call out anti-blackness in fandom spaces? Why didn't you see, backlash against Francesca's meta? Why are you missing what's happening in your fandom spaces? You should curate your fandom experience. I told you I block so many people, but I also make sure that I keep up to date with what's happening so that, like, God forbid something happens, I can be like, no, I know what happened. So and so did so and blah blah blah. Like, you need to be on top of this so you don't, when situations of racism happen in fandom, and they will and they do happen often, you're not sitting there like, oh my god, I'm so nervous. Fandom was so safe. Because fandom isn't a safe space for everyone. It's not a safe space for black women, straight up. And I tried to show that, I didn't include some of the worst things that I saw with Candace Patton. Like, people photoshopped her head onto a porn star's body. They accused her of sleeping with the producers. Like, and these were things that were sent to her, And talking about Iris West and Zendaya as maybe MJ are important because the reactions that seemingly progressive, open-minded fans have to their existence and the potential threat they pose to power structures and tropes that fandoms cling to can start these discussions that we need to be having. Fandom needs to do better. And as an institution, and yes, fandom is an institution as big and as solid as a library or a police station. It's an institution. Fandom needs to acknowledge where it stands and how marginalized people here, because we're talking about black women specifically, and the characters that look and act like them are mistreated. We have to do better. You have to do better. All right, so let's wrap this up. Major thanks go out to my friends and followers on Tumblr who've been really great about supporting me through all of this. I've been working really hard and panicking a lot. I also really want to thank Rebecca from Tumblr and Twitter. She helped me get screenshots on the Flash fandom's racism because I'm not super into the fandom because I'm very behind on the show. If not for the fact that I was spoiled weeks ago, the reveal for the engagement would have not happened in this. I'd also like to thank two really awesome people, Rukmini Pandey, who was on my panel, and Lori, who was also on my panel, Lori Morimoto. They're both fan academics, brilliant writers and creators, and I really like that they've been letting me bounce ideas off of them. They've given me a lot of advice and support, and my roommates, because they've had to put up with me. So for further reading, one of the things that I wrote was the techniques of erasure, which looked at the ways that white and non-black fans use to erase and diminish characters of color in fandom spaces. I think it's really something that a lot of people need to read. It's important. I'll probably try and update it, but as basically everything's on lock until I finish my PhD. Yes, my PhD. Yeah, I know. Um, a lot's going on. So just two blogs that aren't me are Diverse High Fantasy. They're on Tumblr and they do a lot of work primarily with the Star Wars fandom, but they also talk about anti-blackness in all of fandom. And then there's Desiree Rodriguez, who works with Nerds of Color, and what I do with black characters and kind of the fandom drama she does with Latinx characters and comics fandoms and representation. She's great, and I think that she's another voice you need to have when you're looking for this criticism. All right. Boop.